Hi, good evening. Today is 10th of July 2024, and we're very privileged again to have this part two of the unfinished story of Brother Roger Lam from Hong Kong. The last time he has left over some of the questions which we asked him, and today he will follow up and tell the story of how he break through uh, from the idea of money, mammons, yeah, as the Bible say. And without ado, let us welcome Brother Roger Lam to tell his story with us. Brother Roger Lam, over to you.
Thank you, Brother Joshua. It's a privilege to be back. And I will give a very brief recap of part one, and then I'll move on to the next leg of the journey. So, quick recap of what we discussed in part one is, in a nutshell, how I learned stewardship supernaturally, starting really, I think, God's designed it to be my life story, really. And I would highlight that it started really from an uneducated decision that I made after I heard a full-length sermon on tithing for the first time in 2005 to live accordance to biblical teaching in the area of money and possessions. At the time, I had no idea that that was actually the single largest um, topic in the whole Bible with over 2,350 verses on money and possessions. And then I described how that 10-year learning process was supernaturally. And those three phases actually perfectly mimicked Micah chapter 6, verse 8. And it was affirmed supernaturally at the Christian Economic Forum held in Singapore in the summer of 2015. Thereafter, in early 2016, I received a download supernaturally again at a stressful situation in the presence of a Forbes Global Top 75 billionaire um, in Shanghai. And in a nutshell, the ultimate truth about money is this: no matter how much money you have, even if you could bring it with you to heaven, it's not going to cut it. We need to be rich towards God, and there's a whole host of verses that Jesus gave us that leads towards that truth. So I don't want to spend too much more time on recapping part one. Ever since then, God had already taught me about stewardship, and then he gave me the download on the ultimate truth about money. Then the next thing he taught me was generosity. Again, I had no idea that that was on his agenda, but this is how it actually unfolded. It was through, again, three distinct stories, which I will call the small, medium, and large size stories of generosity. We'll start, and it actually happened in that chronological order. I'll start with a small size one, which I most oftenly tell at speaking engagements because it's relatable and doable for everyone, really. It was probably around maybe April in 2016. And then it was one Sunday, I was at church. The seat on my right was vacant. And in comes a Caucasian brother whom I had never seen before. Now, I had been worshiping at Community Church Hong Kong since 2002. So I've been there, a good, like, say, 14 years, and I've never seen this guy before. He comes in with a little bit late, and he walks in with a saxophone case, and he looks exactly like Kenny G, the saxophone musician. And so I took a double look at him, and just to make sure he's not Kenny G. And then he sat down. And then he brings out his Bible, and I was again a little bit astonished. It was a really, really well read Bible. He had written so many notes all over the margins of it, and it was so well underlined. And I thought, wow, I mean, he must be a very, very strong believer. I should, make a point to say hello, introduce myself and say hello to him after the service. And I did that. So we started chatting a little bit, and it turns out he is indeed a professional saxophone player. He was previously playing in a jazz band on a cruise ship, but he had recently just lost his job. And so he was busking in the streets of Central District in Hong Kong, trying to make a living. Now, the worship team at our church does not have a saxophone player, so I thought, well, if he would indeed like to stay at our church, he could really jazz up the music if he joined the worship team. So I introduced him to the worship band. So after they started chatting, all of a sudden I heard these three words that were spoken fairly clearly to me: give him money. So, um, so I brought out my wallet and I looked, how much cash I had inside, and I had two $500 Hong Kong dollar notes in there, which is probably around, I don't know, I call it 600 ringgit or so, or 700 ringgit. And so essentially, now I've never met this brother before. So essentially, I had three options, I thought. Option number one is to pretend that I didn't hear from God. Option number two is to give him one of the $500 notes, which is half the cash I had on me. Or option three, which is to empty my wallet and give him all the cash that I have on me. I chose the last option. So I walked back to the conversation, and then I said to the brother, excuse me, sir, there's something I'd like to chat with you about. Can we step aside? So very discreetly, I had the two bills in my hand, and I shook his hand like this, and then and gave him the money. And then I asked him, I said, well, is it your first time worshiping at Community Church Hong Kong? He said, yes. And then I said, and then I asked him, so what brought you here what brought you to our church this morning? And then he said, God told him that morning to come to this church and this particular service because someone was going to give him enough money to help him survive for the next little bit. And when I heard that, I felt like there was a little bit of a electric current going through my body, which just happened again, even though this must be like the 500th time I've told this story. So I just felt that my small bit of obedience to following God's voice and instructions resulted in a small-sized miracle in making this provision happen for this brother. We chatted a little bit more, and I assumed that he was going to come back to our church, but I've never seen him again. So for all I know, he could have been an angel, which is along the lines of Hebrews chapter 13, verse 2, and showing hospitality to strangers. One thing he did tell me, and he kept stressing, is that the end is nigh, the end is nigh, the end is nigh. That was April 2016. So that's the small-sized story of generosity. So before I can move on to the medium-sized story,
Yes, go ahead, Brother Roger. I think the audience is very interested, want to know more about your continuing story. Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. So medium-sized story. Um, January 2017, um, I met a Korean pastor who was jailed in North Korea for 2.5 years. He was released from prison in North Korea in 2016, and it was a fairly high-profile story. It was featured in Time and CNN and et cetera, et cetera. So he came to our church to share his testimony and about his new book. And so I got to meet him, heard his testimony, and I felt, very touched by his story. A couple months later, he came back to Hong Kong, and a brother at our church organized a small group dinner with this Korean pastor. And he didn't, no agenda was specified. So I thought I very naively just assumed it would just be a dinner. And towards the end of the meal, this Korean pastor, he started to talk about his desire to start a new ministry based in Seoul, and it would be exclusively for the benefit of North Korea to number one, to start a global 24/7 prayer uh,
Now what?
a network for North Korea. And then he also wanted to help the um, asylum seekers from North Korea, which he told us most of them turn out to be female. And sadly for them, they basically escape the hell from North Korea, and then they come to another hell in Seoul, which is the red light district in Seoul, because of a lack of skills to job interview and to look for proper work. So his idea was to start a community center where most of the North Korean asylum seekers live, and basically teach them English and also teach them how to write a CV, how to interview, so that they could hopefully get a retail sales job in a department store or what have you. Now, from part one of my sharing, I had mentioned that ever since I started tithing in full in 2007, my income trajectory just kept going lower and lower and lower and lower and lower. And so by this time, this was 2017, that trend had not broken. And previously, as I had mentioned in part one, the year that I suffered from panic disorder, the Lord helped cure me of that by of my panic from negative cash flow. That year, He saved me with a bonus that was just sufficient on an after-tax basis to cover for the negative cash flow from the previous 12 months. But this time around in 2017, business was not so good, and there was really no prospect of getting any bonuses at the end of that year. All of a sudden, I heard a number, and it was very odd. It was a US dollar number, very specific figure. So I was in a little bit of a panic, because now God had already cured me of my nerves combating with negative cash flow. But the number that he just spoke to me represents 18% of my annual base salary, and I was already running negative cash flow, and there was no prospect of getting a bonus really at the end of the year. So I really didn't want to disclose that the fact that I just heard a number. So all I did was I strategically asked the Korean pastor. I said, "Do you have any idea of how much money you need to raise yet?" And he said, "No." So I thought, phew. So maybe this will pass, and I don't have to. I don't, this will just go to pass. 2 months later, I received an email from the brother who organized that dinner, and there included a business plan from the Korean pastor. It had very detailed line by line expense items of how much it would take to start up this new ministry. And now the peculiar thing is 2 months earlier at the dinner was in Hong Kong. I heard the number was in US dollars. The email that he sent, the very, very, very I cannot explain it. Even though his ministry is in Korea, he did not specify the amounts in Korean won. He did it all up in US dollars. And at the end of the spreadsheet, there was a number. It was exactly the same as the number I had heard at dinner 2 months earlier. And at that point, he did not even himself, he didn't know how much money he had needed to start this ministry. So again, I felt, this electric current going through my body, which just happened again just now as I tell the story again. And I just thought that this is no coincidence. This is like a little bit like the movie Interstellar, where there's communication between God and myself through the space-time continuum. And I thought I cannot take this lightly. I must do something about it. But I was naively hoping that I could socialize this through a fundraising exercise. So there were 5 families in attendance at dinner 2 months earlier. So what I did was I immediately started a WhatsApp group with those 5 families, and then I suggested they all received that email. So I suggested, well, why don't we split it 5 ways? And we'll all do 1/5 of the amount and help this brother start his ministry. Everybody said, yes, it's a good idea. Let's do it. So I thought, well, I need to lead by example. So I suggested to everyone that I will do the first 1/5, and I will report back on the process, and then you guys can follow suit. I looked a little bit more carefully at the pamphlet for the new ministry.
Mm-hmm.
And the payment method suggested was through PayPal. Now, I have nothing against PayPal, but I just thought that PayPal charges a, fairly significant commission, and it's a brand new ministry, and I thought they really do need every dollar to start this ministry. So I reached out to this Korean pastor and I said, is there a more direct way of giving you the money? And he said, yes, we just opened a bank account in Seoul. Here are the details. You can just wire the money there. And then once he told me that, then all of a sudden a different form of fear kicked in. All of a sudden, I thought to myself, he was imprisoned in North Korea not so long ago. I'm sure they're keeping tabs on him. If I send money to him, if I send a meaningful amount of money to him to start a ministry for this purpose, then I will I
You
may
will also be, yeah, trapped.
I may attract some personal risk. And this is totally different from financial or economic risk. But as I was fretting about that, then the passage in 1 Peter chapter 4, verses 12 to 15 came to me. And that passage basically says that don't be surprised at the painful test that you're suffering, and rather you should be glad that if you're sharing in Christ's sufferings, then you will be full of joy when his glory is revealed.
Mm.
And basically, I should take this as par for the course. If I do something for Jesus, and if I have to suffer for it, I shouldn't be surprised, and nor should I fret over it. And once this passage came to me, then my fear subsided. Then I contacted my banker, and I did the wire transfer to this ministry. So that the first 1/5 was taken care of. I reported back to the WhatsApp group that I had done that, and I told everybody that unfortunately there's no Hong Kong income tax reduction benefits since this NGO is overseas, but it's meaningful. So I encourage everyone to follow suit. A couple weeks later, I checked in on the Korean pastor again. I assumed that he would have received all the funds. And then he told me that he didn't receive any amount apart from just my 1/5. So I was a little bit dismayed. And then the next day I ran into a neurosurgeon, a neurologist brother in Hong Kong. This is not Dr. Sung. This is a Hong Kong neurologist. And I just gently asked him, I said, oh, have you been really busy? Perhaps you have overlooked, this to make payment. And he says, oh, yes. I forgot to make payment. And therefore, and the next day he sent the money. He sent his 1/5 to this Korean ministry. So another few weeks later, I checked in again with the Korean pastor, and then those were the only 2 payments that he had received. And then it just dawned on me that when God told me the amount, he gave me the amount 2 months in advance. He meant it. And basically he was telling me that don't nickel and dime with me, and that, whatever instruction that I give to you, don't use a capital markets method of trying to like fundraise and water down your assignment. The money belongs to the Lord, and I'm just his custodian. So act according to instructions. So long story short, I gave the full amount that I heard at dinner. And when I contacted the Korean pastor again, he told me that his budget increased by 40%. And I was a little bit upset. I thought then the amount that I gave is insufficient. So in the end, another sister made good on her promise to give her original 1/5. So when I gave the original amount plus the 1/5 from the neurologist brother plus 1/5 from the sister, then that was just enough to help this ministry get kickstarted. So the lesson that God taught me through this medium-sized story is, number one, I'm not the only game in town. It took me and the faithfulness of this neurologist brother and the sister, the 3 of us together, to help, get this ministry going. And then the second thing which the Lord taught me is the money is his. I'm just a steward or custodian or fund manager. So whatever instructions I receive from him, do it accordingly, and don't nickel and dime with him and try to like weasel my way out and with trying to socialize with the fundraising aspect of it. So this is the medium-sized story. I can pause here before I move on to the large-sized story.
Okay, so I can see that you've been faithful in the small story and then the medium size, but I noticed that some pattern here, Brother Roger. In your experiences on money, especially in terms of giving, all right? Would you agree if to say that precision is the name of the game? I mean, God is asked you to give how much, and do you think it is a recurrence not only in yourself but also supposed to be a general theme for others as well?
Well, I think um, that boils down to two factors. First factor is I believe the Lord wishes to communicate with everyone. But I think there's a lot of factors that block out our communication channel, our hearing
Mhm.
ability to hear from God and to communicate with Him. So I think point number one is I think that we need to demonstrate our eagerness and willingness to be friends with the Lord. He really does want to be friends with us and communicate with us. But a lot of times, because of hardness of our heart, or our own agendas, or our own or a whole host of other issues, we're not tuned in to hear his voice. Now, so that's issue number one. Number two is in terms of, does the Lord ask everyone to give a specific amount? Now, it's not the amount that he wants, but I believe he wants everyone to be generous. And when he wants us to have a general posture of good stewardship and generosity to those within our periphery of vision and within our sphere of influence. Now, I mean, we all know that the highest praise that Jesus gave to any individual giver is the poor widow. She gave out two little copper coins. But Jesus said she had given more than anybody else, more than the rich donors, more than the rich patrons, because she had given everything that she had to live on. So it's all about the heart. It's all about, whether you want to honor God more than anything else. So that's my 2 cents to your
Oh,
to
very good. That lead me to one more question before you proceed with the third level. In that aspect, how do we tune in, or as you say, to be the same frequency to God, able to listen to Him to tell us exactly what He wants us to do? If you may enlighten us
Well,
on that.
I don't pretend to have an
Yeah,
instant formula for
yeah,
that.
fair enough.
But what I would share is a little bit from the recap from part one. So just drawing from my own experience. So I made the decision, an educated decision, to follow biblical teaching in the area of money and possessions after hearing that sermon on tithing in 2005. Basically, I kind of stuck with it, and it became it became a journey of pneuma tutorial. So it's a spirit-led teaching. It wasn't There was no any human teacher who guided me through this journey, and the Holy Spirit gave me a lot of like out clauses. He gave me a lot of he gave There were a lot of junctions where basically he asked me, are you serious in wanting to follow the area of money and possessions to be the area of congruence in your life? I mean, namely in the second story I shared in part one about the year of debt forgiveness, when I heard for the first time in 2014. Little did I know it was on the 7th year of making a zero interest loan to a brother who was facing very real physical harm, a threat of physical harm from a loan shark. And the Holy Spirit, I heard him directly for the first time. in the form of a question. When did you lend money to this brother? And I obviously I responded favorably towards the Lord. I decided I knew instantly that it was the I was reminded that it was the year of debt forgiveness, and that basically he was asking me, "Are you serious about wanting to stick it out and to walk the talk, so to speak?" And it's not like anybody held me accountable to it. I was the only person who knew. But I stuck with it, and I think so. I think it's the persistence to honor God and to stay on the path, to journey with Him, and not be so. Obviously, this determination comes from Him. It's by His grace that that I'm able to do that. But you know, I think I also had a little bit of a decision whether to sway from it or not. So I think in a short answer is I think it's really obedience.
Yeah.
It's the choice to be making the choice to be obedient and to stay with it. Even though it might be challenging, even though it might be daunting, even though it can trigger a whole host of, panic disorder buttons in me. I think that's yeah, by His grace, I was able to do that.
Right, right. I think the audience is waiting for your third part. Yeah, you can continue the
Sure,
wonderful story. Yeah,
sure. I'll now move on to
yeah,
the large size story. About maybe like mid 2017, my pastor at the time, he just came up with the idea that he was just thinking that maybe the church can start thinking about buying our own premises in Hong Kong, in the heart of Hong Kong. And this is before he had, gone, the deacons to approve the plan, so on and so forth. So this was just, his idea at the time. But when I heard it, I felt really enthusiastic about it, and I felt, I really want to contribute to that. So even though this was pre-official, I went back and did some math, and I looked at my cash holdings, and I decided on an amount that I thought was generous towards making a purchase for the premises. But then it, but then I did a little bit more math because we have a fairly small church with a, number of family units, less than probably 100 families at our church. Basically, I thought that every every family unit would have to come up with the same amount as I was willing to in order to make it feasible for a purchase of real estate in central Hong Kong, which is pretty expensive. So I thought, well, this is not likely, this is not going to be feasible. So instead of just looking at my cash balance, I looked at my balance sheet. I looked at what assets I had. And there happens to be a NASDAQ listed stock, which I stumbled upon buying back in 2000 during the dot-com bubble. And I alluded to this at the end of part one. And this is the highlight of the large size story of generosity. I bought it in 2000. It was $10 US at the time. I didn't have too much idea of what it does, apart from a few American friends who told me that this company produces a super powerful chip mathematically that that a lot of video gamers would put it in their PCs and laptops for gaming purposes. And I had this habit of just, buying things and holding. And I was working in a bank basically all my life. And I didn't really like the disclosure process. Basically, you had to fill in a form, get an approval, and then by the time that you receive the approval, it will be like a few days after when I would first want to sell the stock. So it's for reasons. It's not a very good reason to not sell to not sell investments, but basically because of that, I had been holding onto the stock, and by mid 2017, the stock had grown from $10 to $100. And at that time, it was touted to be to have a potential future in the area of artificial intelligence because of its computational prowess. And so I thought that, well, I mean, if it had gone from 10 to 100, even before AI, well, I mean, the stock could easily go from 100 to 1,000 if it does, if it does maintain as the industry leader in the area of AI. So without anybody pressuring me, I just made a promise to the Lord. I promised the Lord anything north of $100, whenever and at whatever price that I sell this particular stock, I would give half of it, half the profits above 100 for the church premises. I did some math, and if it did go to 1,000, and if I sold it and I gave out half of the profits from 100 to 1,000, that would be more than that. That really would be more than enough to pay for the down payment and some more for a reasonably sized church premise in the heart of Hong Kong. So I made this promise, and probably it was July 2017, and then the plan became was still remained unapproved and unofficial. In October that year, I got my department at my last job in equity capital markets at CIMB in Hong Kong got closed down unexpectedly, and I was a little bit disappointed, and I didn't really know what I was going to do next. But as I had mentioned in part one of my sharing, even back in 2015, I had a little bit of an inkling of um, writing down my story of how I learned stewardship in the form of a book. And at this point, I have even more content. I have the ultimate truth about money, and I had some stories of generosity that the Lord had given me. So, and I thought, well, Roger, you have a 3-month gardening leave period between now and January 2018 when your employment would officially end. And I thought, if the excuse back then to not write a book was that I don't have enough time, well, now you've got 3 months on your hand. And if you don't write the book now, you're never going to write it. So I naively thought, well, this is going to be my way of living out Matthew 6:33. I would, in order to seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, I would take the next 3 months to write the book, find a publisher, and get some good book reviews on it, and then get it on the shelf. And then I naively thought that, and then all else would be given to me. I just assumed that the Lord would give me another salaried job in the field of finance, and I would just go from there. So I did start to write the book, And I came out with the first draft of Lost and Found. Oops. Lost and Found Money versus Riches by December. And by then, I had also found a self-publisher, which is part of HarperCollins Christian Publishing. Basically, I paid them to publish my book, and they would help me to put it on they would help me to put it on Amazon, and they would help me to come up with an ebook, et cetera, and a hard copy, et cetera, et cetera. So, so then the story moves. We fast forward to February 2018. At the time, so my employment had already ended officially. I don't have any income anymore. And then it was February 2018. Donald Trump was the president of the US. During Trumponomics, the market was very rosy. Everything was going well. It was starting to be earnings season, and then suddenly and the stock had doubled from 100 a few months earlier to 200 in early February. But very, very in a really mind-boggling phenomenon, on February 2nd, 2018, it was a Friday, I remember very clearly. Middle of Trumponomics, everything was going well. And then all of a sudden, that evening, the Dow Jones index dropped by 666 points. It's not a good number. It didn't make me feel good. So I prayed very hard Friday and Saturday, asking the Lord, is there anything you want me to do? Especially with respect to the stock, which had doubled in a few months. So I prayed and prayed and prayed. I heard nothing. I slept really poorly on Saturday night, such that I got to church a little bit late on Sunday. I was not in a good state. I didn't, wasn't paying 100% attention to the pastor until he said this one thing. It seemed like it had nothing to do with anything else he was talking about that morning. But he said this, whenever God wants to speak to us, he will use very simple words, and he will speak very softly to us because he wants us to understand. At the end of his sentence, I heard one word: sell. Now, if I didn't tell you about my earlier story, then you would think that, oh, maybe this is just a coincidence. He doesn't really have a track record of hearing the voice of God. But as you would probably all agree, I have heard from the Lord a number of times before, and I was very confident that this was not me hallucinating. Now, but then the 25-year finance industry veteran, would talk back to God. And I would have the audacity of thinking this, and I would say to God, Lord, I appreciate what you just told me to sell, but we should buy the dip. We should not sell into the dip in a bull market. I realized that it had just dropped by an ungodly figure of 666 points on Friday, but I don't think it's such a good idea to sell, is it? And could you be a little bit more specific on the timing? Because, really, I don't think it's such a good idea to sell right now because it's buy the dip. It's not sell into the dip. So after the service that day, my ex-wife had bought tickets for the kids to go see a kids show. She didn't get a ticket for me, so I just parked at the curb and waited for them outside the art center in Hong Kong. Now, I am going to tell you a little bit about my quiet time routine, which I had started probably around 2010. So it's been a while in a nutshell. I started on that very day in 2010 with this routine. One chapter of Old Testament, one chapter of New Testament, one chapter of Psalms, and then the chapter of Proverbs that corresponds to the date. There are 31 chapters of Proverbs, so there's a corresponding chapter of Proverbs for each day. Now, that day was February 4th. It was a Sunday. So my Proverbs reading for that day was Proverbs chapter 4. Now, what I'm about to tell you, I absolutely cannot explain whatsoever. That day, up till that day, I had been reading the NIV translation of the Bible. For whatever reason, I suddenly decided that or maybe it was 2 weeks prior to that, I decided out of the blue that in order to get more out of my quiet time routine, I ought to switch to another translation. And I randomly picked the Message translation. So Proverbs 4 in the NIV translation, I have read many, many times before. And basically, Proverbs 4 verse 5 in NIV basically says, get wisdom, get understanding. There's not a lot of, doesn't really say much, right? In terms of the question that I had, whether I should sell the stock or whatever. But that day I was reading from the Message translation, and guess what Eugene Peterson translated Proverbs 4 verse 5 as? Sell everything and get wisdom. So I almost fell out of my seat in the car. This was like maximum electric current going through my body as I'm experiencing now, even though I've told this story hundreds of times. And I thought to myself, this is a multimedia instruction. Not only did I heard sell in the word, because I switched to the Message, I actually read sell everything. So I just decided on the spot that the next day I will sell. I will sell. And not only did I decide to sell that particular stock that I had pledged for church premises, I decided to sell everything. So Monday morning, I called up my banker and I said, just for the record, I said, Michael, you've been working for me for a very long time. Just for the record, do you remember me ever selling any stock while we've been having this banking relationship? He said, no, sir, we have never sold any stock. I said, today we're going to do something different. And he said, what would that be? I said, I'm going to sell everything. And then he must have like spat out his coffee or something. He kind of like coughed and choked. So that day in the morning, I sold everything in Asia. And then in the afternoon, I sold everything in Europe. And then that evening, after a board meeting at an NGO where I chaired the board, I called the US night dealer at the night desk and I sold the US stock. I exited that stock at 227, which means that there's a profit of $127 per share. That's above the $100 strike price that I set, and half of that profit is dedicated to church premises. So that night I slept very, very well. Maybe it's because I obeyed and I didn't have any anxieties. And the next day when I woke up, I prayed a really unusual prayer. I said, Lord, I obeyed. I said to you, it may not be such a good idea to sell into the dip, but since you gave me the multimedia instructions, I just wanted to keep my track record of obedience. Now, when I go and switch on my phone And if I see that everything has rebounded and flying, will you please comfort my heart, then help me feel not to feel so stupid? Because it's really not stupidity, it's obedience that drove me to do what I did the previous evening. When I So I got up after the prayer, I switched on my phone, and then I I woke up my ex-wife. I said, "You're not going to believe this. I've never done this before." I woke her up because of the stock market. The Dow Jones index dropped 1,500 points after I sold everything. So at that point, I again had this massive surge of electric current going through my body, and I thought, yes, I must have become an upgraded version of a steward. Now God must be, He will tell me optimally when to, like, sell high, buy low, and la di da di da, because I've proven to be a safe pair of hands and that I'm a good steward and blah 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 blah. But all the Lord told me was to be still. Essentially, I understood that to be, don't even try to like dabble in timing the market. Don't try to like be cute and like try to buy back the stock and da 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 da. Just, and then in the interest of time, there's only 10 minutes left. So I'm going to cut out quite a bit of details. But long story short, when I sold the stock, I informed my pastor um, there's a good sum of money that really does not belong in my account. And again, um, I received some instructions and warnings from my quiet time. The first warning I received was my Psalm reading in the next few days. It was Psalm 76. Towards the end of it, it says, "Make good on your promises to God and bring your offerings as you had promised." So, long story short, the council finally approved the plan, and I sent the money. I sent the money to church. Now, I carried on, so this was all done by March of 2018. I carried on with the book, the publishing of the book, and but the Lord made it really, really clear to me that the book is just a visual aid. He actually doesn't need my book. He just needs me to tell my story faithfully whenever he calls me to. And now I thought that, the large size story would end just there. And I also thought that the story with the book would just end right there, but it didn't. The book um, ended up publishing a little bit later than I would have liked. And yet, precisely because of that, the Lord made it abundantly clear that he didn't need this visual aid. He had already, before the first copy was published, before the first copy was sold even, my story was brought to mainland China, and there were Christian ministries that at that point there were still mass media Christian ministries operating in China. And once they heard my story, they said, "You have to come up to Beijing immediately to do interviews, and we have to film your story." And even before the first copy was sold, they started translating my book into Chinese, and they started to look for ways for my book to be published in China. This just doesn't happen. It was beyond my wildest imagination. And with regards to the stock, now I alluded to, I did not reveal the name of the stock in the book, but today, 6 years later, I don't see a problem with it. It's very topical. It's a household name now. It's NVIDIA. Now, when I said that the stock when the prediction that I wrote in the book, I said I thought that the stock would go up from 10 to 1,000, from 100 to 1,000. I was right, and I was wrong. I was right in the trajectory and but I was wrong in the magnitude. The stock not only go up from 100 to 1,000, it actually ended up going up to 7,000. And the stock has now had two stock splits. So the original cost of my position would have become the current share price equivalent of 20 cents. The stock a week ago at its high was 140. Now, the point I made at the end of sharing part one is that if I did not obey the multimedia instructions to sell everything, I would be financially a lot richer today. And I also, and it to the tune of hundreds of millions of ringgit. But I also alluded at the end of part one, had I done that, I would have no message today, because the message would have been, look at how I've prospered financially by disobeying even multimedia instructions from God, from that soft whisper of sell and to that timely Proverbs chapter 4, verse 5 translation from Eugene Peterson of sell everything. Now, I find that God is very gracious. He just told me to sell. If he had told me you're going to part ways with hundreds of millions of ringgit, I think that would have been a lot more difficult. But all he did was tell me a very simple instruction in two different methods, and I obeyed. And now I can honestly, hand on heart, say that even though I still have a lot of financial obligations, I most likely will have to sell my home to fulfill a divorce settlement payment to my ex-wife because she's legally entitled to it. I still have no regrets of obeying God and selling NVIDIA. Um, you know, most people would say prematurely or unwisely, but I honestly believe that that's the best thing that that I could have done, because had I not, my heart would have been totally wrapped up on how the stock would have, would have been increasing my net worth. I would not have been so single-heartedly focused on my ministry of unveiling the deceitfulness of wealth. And I would be a lot more arrogant today, probably, if I were that much richer. And honestly, I would not have the message of in stewardship and generosity. So in light of time running out, now that I want to share with you three passages for my quiet time routine today. And this is the same quiet time routine that was started in 2010. It just continued uninterrupted for 14 years. And you will be shocked at the passages that came up today. Brother Joshua had decided that today would be the day of part two of the sharing. And I kid you not, my psalm reading for today is Psalm 132. Lord, do not forget David and all the hardships he endured. Remember, Lord, what he promised, the vow he made to you, the mighty God of Jacob. I will not go home or go to bed. I will not rest or sleep until I provide a place for the Lord, a home for the mighty God of Jacob. My Old Testament reading for today is Isaiah 66. The Lord says, Heaven is my throne, and the earth is my footstool. What kind of house, then, could you build for me? What kind of place for me to live in? I myself created the whole universe. I am pleased with those who are humble and repentant, who fear me and obey me. And my New Testament reading for today is Luke 17. Suppose one of you has a servant who is plowing or looking after the sheep. When he comes in from the field, do you tell him to hurry along and eat his meal? Of course not. Instead, you say to him, Get my supper ready, then put on your apron and wait on me while I eat and drink. After that, you may have your meal. The servant does not deserve thanks for obeying orders, does he? It is the same way with you. When you have done all you have been told to do, say, We are ordinary servants. We have only done our duty. Later on in this chapter, some Pharisees asked Jesus when the kingdom of God would come. His answer was, The kingdom of God does not come in such a way as to be seen. No one will say, Look, here it is, or there it is, because the kingdom of God is within you. Thank you for listening.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brother Roger, who has prompted ended the session, but it was indeed a very blessed session for all. But before we proceed to close today's session, is there any questions from the floor that you would like to direct to Brother Roger? I believe Brother Roger would be happy to answer. Just write down in the type it in the chat box, or you can just raise up your hand, or just unmute yourself and just ask a question. I believe today's session, talk about obedience more than anything. And yeah, is there any questions from the floor? Oh yeah,
Yeah, Joshua, I have one.
okay, yeah, Brother Ong, yeah.
Thank you, Roger, for your wonderful sharing. I'm inspired. God bless you. And my question is, in the process of getting uh, the direct download from the Lord, uh, like you have concentrated so much on reading of His Word. Besides this, have you got any other experience whereby God speaks to you directly through your prayer session?
Excellent question, brother. The short answer is yes. I've heard the Lord tell me a lot of other things. Some are quite disturbing in terms of his return, the timing of his return. He gave me some vague ideas. He didn't give me an exact date, clearly. I would be lying if I knew the exact date, because Jesus said nobody knows except the Father. But he had been telling me about his return, and he also roughly 2 years ago, he also while I was swimming, while I was in the water, he gave me a very specific instruction. Actually, I didn't realize it at the time, but he told me, "Vengeance is mine," and that was 12 hours before the truth about what my ex-wife did was revealed to me supernaturally. So the topics that he speaks to me about is not just in stewardship and generosity.
Yeah, wonderful. I hope Brother Roger answer the question
Yes,
of
indeed.
Brother Ong, yeah?
If you don't mind, I would like to ask another question.
Sure, go ahead.
In the wake of the current geopolitical situation that we are seeing today,
Mm,
with the upheaval in the general elections in Europe and Britain,
Mm,
How do you see the way forward? Because the war in the Middle East is
mm,
not going to stop any time from now.
mm.
I wonder what will be your take to share with us that what would probably will end up with in the current war in the Middle East and also the war in Ukraine.
Well, I will answer. I will answer your question by revealing something about the small-sized story of generosity. In the past, in the 500 plus times that I've told the story, I never told. I didn't include it, write it in the book either. I did not reveal what that Kenny G lookalike brother said to me about the end is nigh. There is a particular prompting in my heart for revealing that this evening. Um, and that's all I'll say.
Yeah, Brother Roger, in lines with your uh, tackling the questions of the end time, I myself have been going through some of the uh, topical and also biblical aspect of it. My question is, do you have any vision of his second coming?
Well, all I'm prepared to say is that I've heard I wouldn't call it a vision because I guess that's not how God communicates with me. But I'll just say that I've heard a number of times across a number of years how he's been telling me about the end times. Um, I think it might be interesting to have another session if that's if that's a topic that you're interested in. But it's quite it gives me the goosebumps. And I'll just give you this one hint. On October 6th last year, which is the day before the war in Israel broke out, the Lord communicated with me, and I didn't understand what it meant at the time. That's all I'm going to say.
All right, great, great. Okay, back to the audience. Any more questions? Oh, I see. Yeah, Susan is there, and also Daniel, and also other. Any more questions from your side? The audience side. All right, I think Pastor Mark, would you like to say something if you are there? Stephanie?
From me. But very good testimony. Thank you very
Yeah,
much, Brother Roger, for sharing your
very
testimony
good. Yeah.
in terms of telling us actually how to be, I mean, in stewardship of material possession, because this is for me a very hard topic and not much preached, especially in the churches, because it's quite a sensitive topic. So to be able to hear firsthand from someone who actually have the experience, it is very real and very true. That God actually also have selected, like in this topic, in this area of stewardship. So thank
Yeah, I think
you very much for the testimony.
yeah, thank you, Sister Stephanie. I think your line is a bit not so good. All right, we wrap up today's show, and we would like to give a big applause to Brother Roger, who has given the Lord's secrets of money and stewardship through him to us. And I believe every one of us has been blessed. And okay, there's one message here. Okay, I think I won't go for it. Okay, thank you so much. We will see you another meeting for this month. All right. And it will be on the 25th of July. All right. Brenda Young will be on air. All right. Until then, good night and
Thank
see
you.
you. Thank you.
Bye.